By this time, the young gentleman had changed her posture from lying breadth to lengthwise on the couch, but her thighs were still spread, and the mark lay fair for him, who was now displayed to us a side view of that fierce, erect he thrusts, machine. She heaves, at first gently and in a regular cadence, but presently the sounds were much more silent, but soon broken murmurs. For my part, I will not pretend to describe what I felt all over me during this scene, but from that instant, adieu all fears of what a man could do unto me. They were now chained back towards the door. She lifted up my petticoats, and with her busy fingers fell to visit and explore that part of me where now the heat and irritations were so violent that I was perfectly sick and ready to die with desire. Patient of seeing the continuation of transactions between our amorous couple, she brought me again to the crevice, so favourable to our curiosity.
Bonjour. C'est moi, Madame du Barry, famed Belle de Nuit, and maîtresse en titre, which are fancy words for whore. I am French, but I speak flawless English with an anachronistic BBC costume drama accent, and I am your host for tonight's entertainment. Welcome to the salon that exists outside of time. Tonight I'm hosting you from the inside of a pauper's bedroom, apparently. The salon exists outside of time, but I don't always have control of space. The Queen Marie Antoinette keeps a chicken farm at Versailles, where she plays pauper. This will be just like that. I was just listening to the audiobook of a disgusting piece of English epistolary smut. Fanny Hill, Memoirs of a Woman of Pleasure by John Cleland. Since its complete publication in 1749, it has enjoyed an infamous, elite status as one of the world's most banned books, in spite of the fact that it deals entirely in euphemisms. Cleland, through the letters of his heroine, Fanny, depicts scenes of lesbianism, anal sex, voyeurism, sadomasochism, group sex, and missionary, without ever using explicit references to a person's anatomy. It's quite wholesome in a way, but what most scandalized mainstream society about the book, ultimately leading to a shift in British obscenity laws and a US Supreme Court case in the 20th century, was that Fanny Hill, in sharp contrast with similar novels like Samuel Richardson's Pamela, did not punish its heroine for her dogged pursuit of pleasure, or reward her for adhering to a narrow, abstinence-only brand of virtue. In Fanny Hill, pleasure is treated as a virtue in and of itself, and the titular Fanny ends her story married to the love of her life and fully owning her devotion to a life of pleasure, erotic or otherwise. Like I said, it's quite wholesome. But I've finished with it now, and I've still got more champagne. You know, it's said that the humble champagne coupé was based on the shape of my predecessors, Madame de Pompadour's breasts. Let's read another book. Secret Diary of a Call Girl. The first thing that you should know about me is that I'm a whore. I love a protagonist I can relate to.
Prologue. The first thing you should know about me is that I'm a whore. I don't mean that in a glib way. I'm not using the word as an analogy for working a desk job or toiling away in new media. Many of my friends will tell you how temping for a year or ending up in sales is equivalent to prostitution. It's not. I know this because I've been a temp and I've fucked for money, and they are in She disappeared into the bedroom as he put me through a few basic obedience lessons, holding uncomfortable positions, holding heavy things in uncomfortable positions, holding heavy things in uncomfortable positions with his in my mouth. 27th of February. After a bit of time passes, it can be difficult to remember how, why, when you liked someone, and nice to revisit it from a safe distance. I still think fondly of someone I fell quickly and hard for, and the 1,000 or so times we were together after that. And the last time with them, too. The few whom I could not get enough of, the way they smelled, felt, tasted. The times sex felt as much a spiritual calling as a biological need, and how those moments kept me going for weeks afterward, like pearls dotting the cord of our moribund relationship. These are nice, these little sketches of people I have enjoyed. It passes the time on trains and in March. The client leaned over me, pulling at his member furiously. "I'm going to come on your face," he said. It was the 6th time in 10 minutes he'd said it, growling as if trying to convince himself. That was all. "I'm going to come on your face." No instructions for me. Half an hour later, he still had not finished. His shoulders slumped and he fell sweaty into my chest. "I'm sorry, honey. It ain't gonna happen," he said, as if it had been my idea all along. 13th of December. Went to Bedford for a booking last night and caught a late train back. I felt inexplicably happy and walked home instead of taking a cab. Neither high heels nor drunken idiots frighten me much. When you spend a life in stilettos, pavements are no hardship. I sang aloud, a song about lovers who want each other dead. It was cold and clear. I looked up and was surprised at the number of stars.
I dressed, applied a fresh coat of lipstick. The money was in a hotel envelope. Wasn't it Dashiell Hammett who said, "You don't pay a call girl to do what she does, you pay her to leave afterward"? Probably. He smiled drowsily. I closed the door softly behind me. There was only one taxi outside. I stepped in the back and was whisked home in the light and sound of a city evening. Wasn't that a thrilling read? Educated banter, poetic language, erotic affairs, and no shortage of pearl necklaces. I quite like affairs, and I love necklaces. The cover of this Showtime original series edition of the so-called Secret Diary informs us that it was penned by Anonymous, but those of us that have been on the internet since 1749 know that anonymity is fleeting, and that there is more to this story than what is on the page. Pour another glass of Chateauneuf-de-Pape and have another bump of snuff, darlings. It's time for an internet history lesson. Now, my younger guests in the salon may not be old enough to remember the early days of the internet, but they are tactful and clever enough to pretend that they think that I'm not either. In the halcyon days of the late 1990s and into the dark ages of the early 2000s, mostly friendless people kept diaries on pages of what was then known as the World Wide Web. These diaries were called weblogs, or blogs for short. One of these early bloggers purported to be a high-class London sex worker who catalogued her daily life under the nom de plume Belle de Jour, after the novel of the same name. The blog quickly drew a large audience. The content was salacious, transgressive even, but the real draw was Belle's voice as a writer. She was dryly funny, whip-smart, and at times deeply poignant. The Guardian newspaper awarded Belle de Jour Blog of the Year in 2003, and in 2005 the blogs were published under the title The Intimate Adventures of a London Call Girl, which was later shortened to Secret Diary of a Call Girl when it was turned into a TV series starring Billie Piper in 2007. Media speculation on Belle's true identity and whether she really was a London call girl ran rampant. Many assumed that Belle de Jour, like Fanny, was erotic fiction written by a man. Toby Young, according to the Telegraph. The Sunday Times ran a front-page headline incorrectly identifying her as Sarah Champion. A half-dozen other names were drawn out of the proverbial powdered wig, none of them correct. But At some point in her anonymous career, a fellow blogger known simply as Darren correctly identified her based on a piece of fiction she had written under her real name. Darren kept Belle's identity a secret and set up a Google whack, a contest to find a Google search query of 2 words that only provides 1 result, in order to monitor any possible searches for Belle de Jour and Belle's real name. For 5 years, no one did. Then, in 2009, Darren alerted the author of Belle de Jour's blogs to a number of Google searches originating from IP addresses at associated newspapers, the publishers of the Daily Mail. The searches were for the terms Belle de Jour and Brooke Manianti. Afraid of being outed before she could come out on her own terms, Dr. Brooke Manianti, then a research scientist in Bristol, revealed her identity in a Sunday Times article titled, "I'm Belle de Jour." In a follow-up blog post, Dr. Manianti wrote, "It feels so much better on this side. Not to have to tell lies, hide things from people I care about, to be able to defend what my experience of sex work is like to all of the skeptics and doubters. Anonymity had its purpose then. It will always have a reason to exist. For writers whose work is too damaging or too controversial to put their names on." The famed London cool girl, as it turns out, is American. Brooke Manianti grew up in Florida. My condolences to Dr. Manianti, and achieved her master's degree in genetic epidemiology and PhD in forensic science at the University of Sheffield. After submitting her thesis in 2003, she moved to London, intending to find work as a scientist, but in the city she found her meagre savings didn't last very long. So, for 14 months, she worked as a £300 an hour escort to get by. In later interviews, she would marvel at the fact that these 14 months would come to define her entire career. Back in 2009, Dr. Manianti was now an out Belle de Jour, which came with the benefit of being able to speak publicly on sex work and sex workers' social and labour rights. She was interviewed for radio and television, and she was invited to debates. She published a regular Sunday Times column and a fiction thriller under her own name, and gave a TED Talk on the topic of anonymity. But a woman of pleasure with a name and an identity is ever a target for scandal. One of Dr. Manianti's former partners was quickly identified and sued her, as well as the Sunday Times, for libel. Is my tit hanging out? No, good. Dr. Manianti then countersued the ex-partner for alleging that she had never really been a sex worker, while experiencing the financial bloodletting of a few drawn-out legal battles. The science jobs were drying up. In a 2021 Substack post, Dr. Manianti wrote, "I lost at least as much as I gained from being Belle de Jour in the end. Losing my science career was the thing that affected me the most. I am not fired for being outed as Belle de Jour, but I am never hired for a science job again either. Oh, I interview for plenty and stay to the end of each one, even when it becomes clear the interviews are just so people could say they've met me. For more than a decade now, Britain's right-wing gutter media has revelled in breathlessly reporting anything that could be spun into negative coverage of Dr. Manianti. The headlines that the Daily Mail has written by any other name and directed at any other person other than a woman who is famous for enthusiastically selling sex would be called out for what they really are: harassment, shameless bullying, unbridled cruelty. In 2016, Dr. Manianti moved back to the United States with her husband. She now lives somewhere in the American Southwest, and she cleans houses through an app. She is one of the many millions of labourers making ends meet in the modern gig economy, a subject which she writes about extensively in posts to her Substack under her own name. The title of the Substack is Body of Work, Belle de Jour, and the posts therein contain many references to her former career as a sex worker and then as a famous former sex worker. But it is distinctly no longer Belle. It's better. The Secret Diary of a London Call Girl feels glamorous. There are references to being somewhat poor and hungry, but it's lacquered with this youthful shellac. It's a Carrie Bradshaw kind of poor and hungry, where you always know there's a pair of Manolos waiting for her at the end of the story. Body of work is different. In Body of Work, the shellac has long since peeled away. There are exposed bricks, weeds, and windmills. Posts sprinkled with aged photos deftly weave tales from Dr. Manianti's youth as a working-class Floridian, with anecdotes of late-stage America. The effect is a series both proud and poignant, funny and sad, as lovely as it is devastating. One has to wonder if Dr. Manianti's public life as the artist formerly known as Belle de Jour would have been made so turbulent and difficult had she been a man, or a woman who denounced her life of sexual deviance and reasserted her virtue after the fact. We love to read of the exploits of women of pleasure almost as much as we love to punish them for daring to seek it. The voyeurs will have their fun, and then heads will roll. Reflecting on her time as Belle and what it cost her in a post on her Substack, Dr. Brooke Manianti writes, "Do I regret having been a sex worker? No, I regret not having been a sex worker sooner." Atta go.